Welcome to the Canadian Culture Wars Report. I'm Melanie Bennett. My co-host isn't here today. Unfortunately, he's not well. Shannon Boucher will not be joining me. But I do have a really interesting episode, which I'm going to break down into 4 parts. So the first part, we're going to talk about Danielle Smith and what she said recently about depoliticizing the gender debate in Canada. We're going to follow that up with the story that I personally find the most interesting, that the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity seems to have come into some financial difficulty, which I will look into in some detail. We'll also be looking at a very interesting delegation. Can it be called a delegation? We'll see. From the new trustee at the York Region District School Board, Robert Kolosowsky. He discussed the difference between equity of outcome and equity of opportunity. And lastly, I'll just touch very quickly on an update with the Lawyers Against Transphobia in British Columbia with a podcast by one of its members, James Chamberlain. So don't go anywhere. We will go over these 4, and by the end, I hope you won't mind that it's just me. All right, let's get started. All right, well, Danielle Smith put out on Twitter an announcement that she will be bringing in her new regulations around gender in Alberta on Twitter. In her post, which we shall play and comment on, she raises some very, very good points about how the whole topic has been completely politicized. And there are the usual suspects that got quite upset about this suggestion of depoliticizing. Now let's listen to what she has to say.
My fellow Albertans, I wish to speak with you about an issue that is deeply personal and sensitive to so many: the journey of children and youth in our province who identify as transgender and who are struggling with gender dysphoria. As you may know, after announcing our government's new policy direction on these issues earlier this year, we engaged in extensive consultations with parents, educators, healthcare professionals, sporting organizations, and members of the transgender community. We are now prepared to introduce the legislation implementing these new policies, and will do so when the legislature is back in session. I want Albertans to know what to expect to see in that proposed legislation. But first, I would like to say a few words to those most affected by it. I know these are complex and often deeply emotional topics. As someone who personally understands the profound impact and challenges these issues can cause children and their families, I want to make it clear that our government is here to support and uplift every child and every family of a child who identifies as transgender or who is struggling with gender dysphoria. And more specifically to those children and youth, I want you to know that you are loved. I care deeply about each of you, and you are valued as much as anyone else in our province and in our communities. I am absolutely committed to ensuring that you receive the support you and your family may need during this critical time of growth and self-discovery. I also want you to know that I and those who serve with me in our government are bringing in these new rules for only one purpose. We believe it's vitally important to preserve the time you have as a youth to gain sufficient amount of knowledge, experience, and perspective so that you can fully understand who you are, who you want to be, and what opportunities you may want to have as an adult before making permanent life-altering decisions related to your body. That is so very important to understand. And anyone who claims that these rules were designed to target or somehow harm you in any way are mistaken. Although questioning or disagreeing with these new policies is any person's democratic right, adults who choose to tell children and youth that these policies were designed to hurt them or marginalize them, that kind of rhetoric is irresponsible and harmful to the young people involved, and it is entirely false.
I commend Danielle Smith for mentioning this, which she will a few times more in her little statement here. Yes, this is the issue that the adults in the room need to actually behave like the adults in the room, and they have not been. And I think it's fantastic that she's mentioning that, because we understand that if you keep telling someone that they're going to hurt themselves, a young person that they're going to hurt themselves, they might actually go ahead and hurt themselves. It's our job as adults to, one, argue amongst the adults and not bring the kids into it, but furthermore, to raise up the children and youth, not tell them that they're being crushed and marginalized by society. What kind of message is that? Let's listen to what she has to say.
I sincerely hope that we adults can debate the proposed legislation with maturity and compassion, rather than question each other's motives at the expense of the children and youth who will be listening to the debate.
This is beautiful because this is one of the things I think we need to address more, is that there's this culture of not hearing what someone is saying, that to assume that they mean something else. And I think that's very important that she brings this up here. She's definitely noticed, and I hope that other premiers or MPPs or MPs pick up on this too and start talking about how we need to actually believe someone when they're talking to you. Actually, if they're telling you what their intention is, just look, it might be something else, but we have to go on each other's words, right? And that is followed up by the actions as well. We need to stop assuming this whole dog whistling stuff all the time. We just need to, and our leaders should be leading in that respect, and she is, and I think that's great.
I'll now go over some of the specifics to expect in the legislation. Firstly, licensed Alberta doctors will be prohibited from performing gender assignment surgeries on youth under the age of 18 in Alberta. Puberty blockers and hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment for minors under the age of 16 will also be prohibited unless a minor has already commenced their treatment at this time. For 16 and 17-year-olds wishing to proceed with puberty blockers or other hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment, they may do so only if they have parental, psychologist, and doctor approval. In our schools, the proposed legislation will now require parental notification and consent for a teacher or staff member to change a child's name or pronoun and publicly use that new name or pronoun in a classroom setting or school assembly. And to be clear, this does not mean reporting or outing a student for their private conversations with friends or teachers regarding their gender identity. For 16 or 17-year-olds who choose to alter their name or pronoun used in school, they may do so without parental consent, so long as parents are still notified in advance. In those extremely rare circumstances where a teacher feels that a child might be at risk should the parents be notified of a desired name or pronoun change, Alberta Education will provide a protocol to ensure the protection of that child throughout the parental notification process.
This is incredibly sensible. This respects families, respects that parents are the safeguarding mechanism of their children, that they're the primary caretaker. It respects the child's privacy within the classroom. I actually think this is fantastic, and we should probably be doing this across the board in Canada. So I support this 100%.
I am convinced that parents, even those who may disagree with the decision of their child, will still love and care for that child no matter what choices they make. It would be wise for all of us to remember that, rather than questioning the love of parents and their paramount role as the primary caregivers and teachers of their children. In addition, the newly proposed legislation will require parental notification and a parental opt-in requirement for each instance a teacher intends to address issues or subject matter involving gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. Furthermore, the provision of resource materials or presentations to students related to these subjects in our K-12 schools must be approved by the Ministry of Education to ensure age appropriateness and relevance to school curriculum. And finally, as it pertains to women and girls,
before she goes on to women and girls, I also think this is an incredibly important thing that she's doing here, which is monitoring the materials that are being brought into the classroom by third-party organizations, because we've seen that there's been a lot of issues with that. The third parties and even the schools themselves can be very irresponsible in terms of what they bring in. Age appropriateness is something that I think needs to be discussed more, and to actually put definitions on that, because our understanding of what age appropriate means, and let's say somebody who believes in gender ideology and has to be pushed on children, or even somebody who's all into this idea of queer theory, may have a very, very different definition of what age appropriate means. So is it just these topics are appropriate for anyone at any age? Do we believe that, children are born as sexual creatures that need to be taught about their own sexuality from toddlerhood, and you just need to present those topics in a way that is appealing for certain age groups? That could mean age appropriate. I've read that. That could mean age appropriateness. I have read that in some literature, which is to do with education in early childhood. Or could we mean age appropriate as in the old understood definition, certainly by educators, that children have different developmental phases, and there's some topics which may cause some emotional or psychological distress if they're exposed to those ideas too early. And so we need to really define what that means, but I support this in principle.
girls in competitive sports. Proposed legislation will be tabled that prohibits individuals born biologically male from competing against women and girls in competitive sporting competitions. This will apply to all competitive women's and girls' sports in all provincial sporting organizations, as well as in our schools and post-secondary competitive sporting divisions. Obviously, this prohibition will not apply to recreational or co-ed divisions. And our government will support the formation of additional co-ed and recreational divisions so that all athletes have as many opportunities as possible to compete in their sport of choice.
Okay, another great proposal here. Oh, what a great face that I paused on. It's another great proposal that girl sports are for girls. They are co-ed sports and non-competitive, which is fine. And we'll also create more sports for undefined genders as well. So, this is striking a really good balance to me. This should be appealing to just about everybody.
In closing, I again sincerely ask that as we discuss and debate this proposed legislation, both before and after it is tabled, that we do all we can to depoliticize the discussion and focus on the well-being of the children and youth most affected by these policies. They each need to know that although adults may strenuously disagree on what policies are in a child's best interest, each of us loves and supports them in becoming the person they want to be regardless, and will be there for them if they ever want to talk or need our support. That commitment and care by all of us for these children and youth should not be questioned by either side of a political debate. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on this important issue. And please feel free to contact any member of our government should you have questions or concerns that you wish to communicate with us.
Okay, so that was fantastic. That was really great. And she didn't have to come out and address the issue of the crazy ideologues, but she basically did in the most polite way. I think she made some absolutely fantastic proposals within that. She's reiterating what she's going to do or the changes they're going to make. I think this should appeal to social conservatives, but also liberal-minded people, even maybe the odd socialists here and there. Like, there doesn't seem to be much in here that many people should be getting that upset about. But in fact, we know many people have become very, very upset by this. And let's look at the little Twitter drama that ensued after Danielle Smith released this video. First off, straight off the bat, we have Marcy Yen getting very, very upset. Let's have a look. Marcy says, Premier Smith is doubling down on her plans to target trans youth. She says this conversation is only for adults. Only for adults. That is because she knows that if she listened to the people affected by these policies, she would have to face how many kids she is hurting. How is she going around with knives, gently stabbing or aggressively stabbing these children? Let's find out. Trans youth tell us these policies are deadly. Experts have said that the same thing again and again. Just last week, a study showed that these laws can increase suicide attempts by young people up to 65%. Well, these suicide claims have absolutely been debunked, but never mind. Liberals are telling us otherwise. Danielle Smith, you talk about the need to depoliticize this conversation. Well, how about we start with this? In Canada, the freedom to be who you are isn't about politics. It's a right. As a lawmaker, you should know that. I think Danielle Smith is correct that this has become politicized, and what Marcy is sort of suggesting that this isn't politics. This is being who you are, because she drank the Kool-Aid. She drank the philosophical Kool-Aid. I mean, really, it's kind of a philosophical question on how you view the world, right? This is kind of at the bottom of it, but that philosophical ideology has overtaken progressive politics, and that includes the NDP and the Liberals, who seem to see this as their little flagship issue, right? So to them, this is just an unquestionable fact, and they will only look at data and statistics that supports their view of how the world is, their philosophical understanding of the world, that a person has a soul which is sexed and can have multiple sexes or none at all, and that is what she's saying here, right? It's the freedom to be who you are. Is this sort of transhuman, this freedom to alter your physical body, this trap that you're in, right? Your soul is trapped in this body, and perhaps that's the incorrect body. And if your soul, which has a magical, 3-sided sex, then you can then physically transform that body, and that is not freedom. That's actually liberation. That's a different sort of way of looking at the world. It's not liberty, it's liberation. We're liberating ourselves from the trap of our physical body to liberate it into being its true self, its authentic self that we've imagined. There's a very narcissistic way of looking at the world too. That anyway, I digress here. She finishes off saying, most importantly, to trans youth in Alberta and beyond, we stand with you. We see you, and we will do everything in our power to protect you, support you, and advocate for the rights you unquestionably deserve. Okay, well, what happened next? Most hilariously, Danielle Smith claps back with this post. Earlier in the week, before Danielle Smith released the video, the National Post put out an article. Here's the article here about a 16-year-old, I believe this is in Ontario, who was rushed through to have a double mastectomy, have their breasts removed, and then had regret. That was paid for by OHIP, and then experienced some regret and was told by the doctors that any reconstructive surgery would cost them out of pocket because it was cosmetic. So it's a pretty hard-hitting article about the harms that are being imposed upon children who are too young to make these decisions. So Danielle Smith says, do you mean like listening to children who go through this, Marcy? Now, I cannot prove this, but Marcy comes back quoting an article from the CBC, who's very much on Marcy's side here. I won't read the article, but it seems to me Marcy ran straight to the CBC and needed an article published and clapped back at Danielle with this very poor... there's no clapback in this whatsoever. It's just a reiteration of Marcy saying, you can be your true self. But it's not just Marcy. Oh no, we have Mark Holland weighing in with this comment. He says, I'm concerned by Premier Smith's announcement regarding gender-affirming care in Alberta. Healthcare decisions, including gender-affirming care, should be made between families and their doctors, which she mentions in that video. Clearly, Mark has not watched. He says Premier Smith's plan to prohibit these health procedures outright will have an impact on the health of children and their families and limit doctors' options when they are trying to make the right health decisions for their patients. I don't think Mark has any problem interfering with the medical decisions between doctors and patients. We've discovered that through COVID. But wait, there's more. Here, our very newest Canadian Senator, Dr. Christopher Wells, also from Alberta, weighed in on his opinion. He's blocked me, so I had to use this one. He says, fact check, more deliberate misinformation. Vastly more people regret knee surgery replacement than gender transition surgery. That's about 100 times difference. This is something that's brought up all the time. But what I found really hilarious is that Benjamin Ryan came into this conversation. Now, Benjamin Ryan has been writing about gender ideology and the medical side of that for some time. He's a journalist. He says, fact check, the regret rate after gender transition surgery among adults is unknown due to large loss to follow up in the few efforts to study this. And as for the regret rate for surgeries conducted on minors, the rate is totally unknown due to lack of efforts to study this over the long term, which he's correct about that. What he's saying is that we don't actually have enough information to make these claims. And he goes on to do quite a thorough post, which you can read yourself. I'll put this in the description of the video. And Christopher Wells comes in support of Mark Holland as well. He says, trust the doctors, follow the science, listen to the voices and needs of vulnerable children and their families. Canada's Minister of Health raised concern about healthcare decisions making and Smith's political interference. And again, Benjamin Ryan comes back and says, a half dozen systematic literature reviews, the gold standard of medical evidence, have followed the science behind pediatric gender transition treatment and found it largely weak and inconclusive. Britain's CAS review, 4 years in the making, was built in part off a suite of such reviews. It found pediatric gender medicine is based on remarkably weak evidence. And he's correct here, pointing out, as Christopher Wells, you should know if you have a doctor in front of your name, that the systematic review is absolutely the gold standard. Are they listening? I don't know. I can only make speculation here, but I suspect that they're not interested in the CAS review. They're interested in their own warped view of the world, this very postmodernist way of looking at the world. There's an agenda here that they want to put out there. They're not interested in the actual science itself. Neither is Christopher Wells. I mean, I read his thesis. I have it just over there. He's a die-hard queer theorist if his literature and his his publications or anything to go by. So again, he's not interested. He just wants to trans kids because for some reason these people believe that you have this metaphysical, this spiritual soul that has some kind of sex, and it can have all these multiple different kinds of sex. And if you don't allow people to alter their physical bodies to reflect their inner soul, that they're going to off themselves. So that's the story. Oh, and just the last post. I mean, Benjamin Ryan is not giving up on Christopher Wells' ridiculous posting on this. I will post these tweets in the description so that you can go ahead and read them yourself. They are actually interesting to go through. Benjamin Ryan is a decent journalist, and he does explain this in a really easy to understand using the facts. But that's the story. So Danielle Smith appears to me to understand quite well the problems that ordinary people who care about their families are dealing with, whether it's parents. She seems to understand how these ideologues are rolling back the public sentiment on gay rights, for example. So if you're a conservative gay, what people are going through, or what detransitioners are going through, what the concerns of women and girls who play sports. She really does seem to understand what's going on. And also her approach seems extremely sensible and takes into consideration the views of multiple people, but also balances that with a rational approach to protecting citizens in general and where the government should be stepping in and creating balance or boundaries. So I commend her. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Danielle Smith, you have my full support. And I know that many other people that I know also have, also offer their support to you. So well done. Okay, next up, interesting story of the day. The Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity, which is a nonprofit organization that's been running for, I think it's 19 or 20 years, a long time, which changed their name about, I think maybe 10 years ago. They've gone bankrupt out of nowhere. So they were receiving a lot of money from the government. They were very important. They were linked to Wisdom to Action. Faye Johnstone had links to them. And they also worked with not just the TIP. I think they put out that program and that was rolled out in different cities across the country that I covered on this channel. Just out of nowhere, they just announced that they went bankrupt. Let's have a look. So here's their announcement. They said that we're so sad to share with you that after 19 years of education and advocacy, that the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity is bankrupt. They're bankrupt. Not that they've dissolved, not that they've decided to no longer operate or close their doors for whatever reason. They've just gone bankrupt. They say that it's a result of severe financial pressures that could not be overcome. They're grateful to staff and blah, 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 blah. They said right now our focus is on supporting the group of motivated and talented individuals which have gone into other or looking for other jobs, I guess. I have a feeling that their staff probably didn't know about this. So, right, I was quite surprised when I came across this. I was not expecting it. And I was wondering, okay, well, what happened to not just the TIP? Not just the TIP was a very controversial comprehensive sexuality education program that was rolled out in Regina. I can't remember all the cities, but just some key cities across the country to pilot this particular program. And I went on their website to have a look, and this is what I found. They're just gone. Just no longer exist. Now, fun story. Whether you believe this or not, this is the FBI announcement, I guess, or a page that explains that there's certain symbols that are associated with PDF files. I should probably censor myself now that we're monetized, but that there are certain symbols and signs that are code for adults who wish to engage in inappropriate activity with minors that signal to one another that they're interested in those sorts of things. And here are some symbols that are known to the FBI, which is this sort of triangular, swirly type symbol. And the Center for Gender and Sexual Diversity, whatever they're called, has that symbol as in their own logo. So it's just whether you believe it or not, it's a funny little coincidence that that's there. And the reason I'm bringing this up, someone put in my post this interesting article. This is the article here by a publication that I don't know, but there's a whole bunch of allegations in here about the center, about sort of the management practices. I'll post this also in the description so that you can read it for yourself. I'll just pull out a couple of little bits and pieces from this article that I'll share with you because it's certainly very interesting given what's happened recently. Okay, so here it is on my post. A couple excerpts from the article. So in the article, it says, boundaries were a big issue when I was still 17 years old. So this is the person, the anonymous person that the journalist is, or the writer is interviewing here. It says, when I was still 17 years old and I was working for the CCGSD, Jeremy is the owner, handed me a company credit card and said, go get daddy a coffee, Baz told me. I grimaced. I felt so violated. I don't think I will ever feel like that did in a workplace. It says, for his part, Diaz, the owner, told me that familial language like mom or dad was commonplace in the office, but assured me that it was discouraged in 2015 after employees raised concerns. And later on in the article, it says, in August 2016, Diaz was suspended by the board. Apparently, he was solely running it. There was a board, but it was basically all him making the decisions, and there was a lot of controversy around his decisions. It said that he was suspended by the board of directors and stripped of financial power over the organization. For roughly 2 months, the board conducted a full investigation with the help of external lawyers related to allegations of serious professional misconduct and demands for organizational restructuring. Soon after, as part of the restructuring process, Diaz returned. Several board members quit. The remaining 2 were let go by Diaz, who had the authority as the organization's sole legally recognized members to appoint and remove people from the board. Sammy, I believe that's another anonymous person, described the ensuing months as a witch hunt, where earlier employees were pressured to leave the organization. Diaz held on to the executive director role until June 2019. So this article that I shared was published in 2020, which is 4 years ago. So this was happening 4 years ago. So who knows what happened since? So I wanted to see, why were they in so much financial trouble? On the Government of Canada's grants and contributions page, it seems like they certainly were receiving an awful lot of money. So it's grant after grant after grant after grant over the years. So they certainly were in receipt of several $1 million by now. I don't think this is all them, but yeah, I didn't do an exhaustive search, but they certainly were receiving a lot of money. Here is another interesting document that came across my post. This is an audit. Looks like an audit that was conducted by this particular accountant. And what's in this audit, you can just see, this is 2022, 2023, so last year. And, they have cash flow. Here's their statement of financial position. They have a balance, they have money coming in. They're not insolvent. Again, here's their changes in statement of operations and changes in the assets. They have revenues. Look, they have here $1 million in grants in 2023. They certainly have other income from contributions, I imagine donations, sponsorship, fundraising, miscellaneous income. And in total, their income here, or what's coming in, is $1.23 million. So they certainly had the money. I have a lot of expenses here, but not too many. Yeah, here's a statement of cash flows. So I'm no accountant, but it looks to me like they had money. They had money. It looks like they should be able to operate, but suddenly in 2024, near the end of 2024, boom, they went bankrupt. So I don't know what the story is here, but I suspect there is something juicy going on behind the scenes that we may or may not ever really know about. But I do hope some investigative journalists take this story and dig a little bit deeper, because I have a feeling some spicy details might come out of that investigation. Earlier this summer, I think it was in July, a new anti-woke board trustee candidate for the York Region District School Board was elected, I believe, in the Richmond Hill catchment area for that board. And a statement that he put out at the latest board meeting, which I think is absolutely brilliant and hits the nail on the head as to what the concerns are of many people like myself. So instead of me explaining to you what he said, let's listen to what he has to say.
Around 40% of York Region families have lived under communist governments and the philosophy of equitable outcomes. Those families and countless others understand the counterproductive consequences of this oppressive ideology. Seeing the words equitable outcome or equity of outcome pop up in various school boards, whether intended or not, is extremely disturbing to them. Equity of opportunity is the goal that has guided our education system for many years. It is rooted in compassion and a belief that everyone deserves a fair playing field. It builds people up and works to remove barriers, systemic or individual, that people face to achieving their dreams. Equity of opportunity is the tool that we use every day as we work to eliminate discrimination, division, socioeconomic barriers, and others faced by students and staff. It is a common sense philosophy that builds everyone up, especially those who need our help the most. This positive, unifying, and compassionate goal is exactly what we must keep working hard at as a board. With equity of opportunity, everyone wins and everyone is lifted up, especially those who need help the most. This should seem like common sense to us. Having said that, there is a different interpretation of equity. Equity of outcome, on the other hand, is fundamentally at odds with this goal and the values at the foundation of our education system. Not only that, but it is also at odds with reality. Every human being is unique. This means that it is impossible for each of us to reach the same outcome. By definition, the pursuit of equitable outcomes means tearing everyone down to the lowest common denominator. Hard work is punished and honesty is punished. This is not about compassion, it is about hate and jealousy for those who are successful. Equity of opportunity, on the other hand, is how we can address this. I know this to be a fact in part because of the lived experiences of my ancestors who were oppressed and murdered in the name of equitable outcomes. These lived experiences are shared by hundreds of thousands of York Region families. This cannot be overlooked, no matter the demographics of one person's individual constituency. Many of these families.
Okay, so it's a two-part video. We put out another little video that I'll play in a second. But what he's pointing out is the concerns that many of us have had on the other side of that round table. He's very clever in calling it equity of opportunity versus equity of outcome instead of equality equity. So I think this is brilliant. Let's listen to the second part of his post.
Many of these families are concerned to see this ideology keep creeping into other school boards. We have seen destructive policies, including the following, justified by this belief. Attempts to shut down specialized programs in high schools, attempts to implement policies that stereotype students based on their ethnicity or religious background, attempts to abolish competitive sports teams and academic clubs, attempts to lower academic standard, attempts to eliminate meaningful consequences for students who engage in bullying and violence, and countless others.
So the difficulty, I think this is great. I fully support Trustee Kolosowsky, if that's how you say your name, I hope so. I think we need to have more trustees like Kolosowsky, and I think we will do at the next elections. There's certainly a lot of people working on that point act. I representation for that particular point of view that want to help all students, not just divide students into identity characteristics and then elevate or some more than others based on those characteristics. So this is absolutely brilliant. I think some of the difficulty he may face is that, and I think this is why he used the word equity. So the Ministry of Education does have, requirements for equity. And I'm not sure if they do define equity that well, because there's documents that describe it as equality and some that describe it as equity of outcome. But I think he used the term equity of opportunity to fit into the Ministry of Education's requirements for equity programs. So I think it's an attempt at sort of giving another definition of what equity could mean. So I think that's brilliant. Like I said, the Ministry of Education, certainly here in Ontario, does have a whole department for equity, and they have a lot of money going to equity, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is certainly a federal government priority, and they have definitely pushed that onto the education system. So I think this is a great framing. I support him 100%, and I hope that we see more trustees who are able to do that, because I won't name names, but I certainly noticed that at another school board in the Greater Toronto region, another, I guess, non-woke trustee did try to push a program for a racial group because they weren't being represented under DEI. And the conversation that I had about that was, well, we have to work within the system. I don't think working within the system means bringing forward more racial division, right? Because one racial group is maybe less represented than the other. I think the solution is what Kolosowsky is doing here, is like saying, well, look, you want equity? Why don't we have equity of opportunity instead of equity of outcome? Let's move away from, going to the lowest common denominator, and let's value that people will have different strengths and skills and promote that based on their own merit. So yeah, beautiful. I support this, and I hope we all give him a bit of love for that. And my final story for the day, if I can call it that, it's just a little tidbit of information. I noticed that there is a new podcast out by one of the contributing members of the Lawyers for Transphobia, that group in British Columbia that we talked about. They put out a handbook for the education system on how to make sure that you push gender ideology, queer theory-based gender ideology in schools, saying you must do this. These are the court cases that prove that you must do this, and so on and so forth. And so one of the people from that group, who is a queer educator himself, and I say queer educator, not because I'm saying the guy is gay. I specifically say queer educator because he's definitely pushing the queer theory philosophy of the world, right? So again, this political philosophy, pushing that into the education system. He went on this podcast called Red Eye. I'll put it in the description. You can listen to if you like. It's fairly short. It's about 15 minutes long, and it's promoting the handbook. And that's not necessarily what I wanted to talk about, but I had a little look into this person. His name is James Chamberlain. And interestingly, James Chamberlain was involved in a court case in BC that I just want to quickly share with you. Someone sent me this website this week. It's the Charter in the Classroom, Students, Teachers, and Rights. It's essentially a website giving educators a guide in how to, defend charter rights or engage in charter rights in education. And really, it is really woke. It's how to do it in a woke way. So it gives them, for example, here it's going through the different charter rights, all the different concepts in the charter rights. And in each of the sections, it gives you legal cases as to why you need to defend certain things. The interesting thing is that under freedom of conscience and religion, it only gives religious arguments. It doesn't talk about conscience. And we could put political bias in conscience. So if you have the conscience of belief, not religious belief, but conscience of belief, like let's say you're a social conservative, because this site seems to be not interested in that. But if you're a social conservative, there's no defense for that in here. They're not giving any defense for it. But what they do give a defense of is under freedom of expression. There was this court case who was brought to the BC court, went all the way up to the Supreme Court in 2002 by Chamberlain. Chamberlain is the same person that I was just talking about here. What is this? James Chamberlain. So what is this court case? So he was a kindergarten teacher at the time in 2002, and he wanted to read 3 picture books for his kindergarten classroom. And those books were about same-sex couples. And there was a bit of a heated debate between the parents, social conservative parents, and this teacher. And then there was some controversy with the board. And anyway, so he took it to court. And long story short, he won that he has the right to teach about same-sex couples or read books about same-sex couples. And not only that, but it should be done. So GAL was involved in this. In the court case, it says the school board disallowed the books because it felt that the subject matter was both inappropriate for the kindergarten age level and contrary to religious belief. Some parents of children who attended the school in the district. Were these reasons sufficient to not approve these books? And the court decided that that wasn't sufficient. And so you should read these books, even if there's some religious arguments against it. So there's a conflict here between the freedom of conscience, this is my opinion, freedom of conscience, which is the social conservatives, and the freedom of speech to talk about certain topics. But that's really interesting because we're talking about kindergarten classes, and this is all the way back in 2002. And this case does seem to be used a lot when we're talking about age appropriateness about certain topics. So today's argument is a little bit different. It's not really, so I don't really have a particular issue about same-sex couples. Like, I don't think that's really the argument here, but that's been now moved on to whether or not we should teach children that they could be born in the wrong body. And that's part of the issue. But not only that, some more sexualized topics are actually being brought into younger and younger ages using arguments like James Chamberlain's case in 2002. BC does seem to be absolutely ahead of us and had been arguing these cases decades ago that we're sort of seeing the negative outcomes of now. It says that what occurred between 1996 and 2002, which is a period this James Chamberlain wanted to read these books, has many implications. Questions arise about religion, freedom of expression. They don't mention freedom of conscience, age appropriateness, and censorship. We're talking about school, censorship in school. You know, teachers should not be free to do whatever they want. Do all family models have the right to be represented in a primary school classroom? How much say should parents have over what their children read and learn in school? How much? Yeah, well, that's really part of the issue today too. And these are challenges to be faced in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to be the most valuable tool. So yeah, these arguments apparently have been going on for a really long time. And this person, James Chamberlain, is now pushing, it's not just same-sex families, you know, but is now pushing queer theory and supporting the idea that we have to tell them that they may be born in the wrong body. But the difference between talking about same-sex families is that that doesn't necessarily lead to children removing body parts. And that's the problem that we're having now, is that the question is not just sexuality. I don't personally have a problem with the sexuality element, but when you link and you force team this LGBTQ TQ and all that stuff, is that the TQ really has nothing to do with sexuality, and it does have medical risks, medical consequences if there's regret. And we know there's regret. Just in this episode today, I talked about a 16-year-old in Ontario that felt that they were pushed through the system. They had their breasts removed, and now they have to pay for reconstruction surgery when they realized they were wrong, right? We have a situation where children are being told that their parents might reject them. We have and because of that, schools want to keep secrets about gender transition, which can lead to medical consequences. We have boys identifying as girls going into girls' changing rooms, right? So there's all these consequences with this so-called gender ideology or queer theory that doesn't seem to be addressed by these ideologues that are very, very, very different from just talking about someone's sexuality, which, by the way, totally fine. People are totally fine with this in Canada. And all of a sudden, because they keep teaming all of that together, the whole acronym together, and then start pushing the trans and queer stuff, that's really putting a lot of people off. And it's rolling back the acceptance that just homosexuality had. So that's having a negative impact on regular gay people who are totally not into this too. So yeah, that I just wanted to share that. Please feel free to go listen to the podcast. I listened to it a few times. I did roll my eyes a few times. I was going to do a commentary on it, but decided otherwise this episode would have been too long. But yeah, that's it from me. If you feel so inclined, I would love if you could click the like button, maybe share this with some friends. And yeah, hopefully next week I will be doing a podcast with my normal co-host, Shannon Boucher. But until then, I hope you have a fantastic week.